All right. We all set? We're recording and on the internet?
We are.
We are. Excellent. All right. It is a few minutes after 6, Wednesday, May 4th. It's my pleasure, as always, to call to order the Freeport Planning Board for tonight's meeting. We have Caroline and Cecilia both joining us on Zoom tonight, and we're glad that we're in a position to make that happen. Let's start with item number 1, the information exchange. And as usual, we'll turn it over to Caroline for the best and most up-to-date information.
Very nice.
Can you guys hear me?
Effect style on the.
Am I good to go?
You're good to go, Caroline.
Okay, sorry, I was hearing some interference, just wanted to make sure. So sorry I can't be there in person tonight, but thank you for letting me participate via Zoom, and I'll thank Adam for being in the room with you and controlling the hybrid meeting. It's a interesting experience for everyone. I will note that Mitch was going to be trying to join us via Zoom tonight. I don't see him on yet, but he might appear at some point. So going through the items under information exchange, the first is the update on the Freeport Downtown Vision Plan. The final draft of the plan was presented to the Freeport Town Council last night. It was basically delivered as the final product and accepted by the council. I encourage you all to go to the active Freeport Downtown Vision website to view the plan. There's a PDF copy on there. We will have some copies available at Town Hall for viewing as well. Since we've had a lot of new members on the board and there's a lot of changes going on in the world, especially in the area of land use, it seems like a good time to have a legal workshop with the town attorney. Amy Chow, our town attorney, is willing to come do a workshop with you guys next month, maybe hybrid, or she might be virtual or in person. If there's a preference of the board, you can do one or the either. One question I have for the board is, do you all feel like you have lists of questions to ask her? And would you be willing to come in and start the meeting early so you could workshop prior to the meeting and then have your regular meeting? So I'm looking for feedback on that if you guys have thoughts.
I'd be happy to come in early. I don't necessarily have a list of questions yet.
Okay.
I feel like I need more background information.
Sure. So I was thinking that we could have her go through some basic like housekeeping, rules of order, ex parte communication, freedom of information. I have had a lot of questions from various people in the community about the new housing bill that the state passed. We haven't gotten any legal guidance on how the final version impacts Freeport, but I thought maybe she could give us a high level summary on that. If you guys do have specific legal questions pertaining to the process or your functions, if you want to email them to me, we could ask her that. You know, if the board doesn't have a lot of questions and it's more just going to be some basic operating procedures from the town attorney, I think an hour or a little more would probably be fine. So thoughts from anyone on timing other than Anna?
I concur too. I can come early, definitely.
Sounds like there's enough folks to at least make it worth it to start the meeting early, or the workshop early, rather.
Sorry, Sam, I'm having a hard time hearing. Does everyone have their microphones turned on when they're talking?
Yes.
Yes, we do. We're struggling with a little bit of a feedback loop here, so I think Adam is doing an excellent job muting the TV, but sometimes we're playing catch up a little bit. So
Yeah, there's
Okay, so I'll ask you and you can summarize. 5 o'clock.
time Carol Zoom speak with with your speaks.
right, it's one or the other, unfortunately. So we'll try to speak up when we have the floor, and then we'll be clear about when we're kicking it back to Zoom. I'm pointing over here because that's where it is for me. But okay, so it sounds like, yeah, if we shoot for a little early for the workshop. That's great. Looks like item number 1, sub item 3 is up. Caroline, to put it back to you.
Okay, if I hear that noise, I'm just going to pause. So item 3 was review of the meeting schedule for the remainder of the year. Planning board is scheduled to meet for the rest of the year, the first Wednesday of every month. I would ask everyone to review that schedule and see if they have any conflicts or days they can't be there. Sometimes the board has elected to take a break in one of the summer months. If we're going to do that, it's good to get that out early. If people are thinking they'd like to take a break in July or August. That being said, with the downtown vision plan being presented last night, some ordinance amendments that are going to come out of there, continuing conversation of some of the items that we're going to start talking about tonight, and a comp plan, we're probably going to actually be asking you to meet more. But if we can't have people there, if there's time, people are going to be away on vacation, we definitely want to know that. And it's much easier to work that into our schedule now than later. So we're looking for thoughts on that remainder of the year schedule from board members.
I don't see any conflicts personally coming up.
No conflict?
None for me.
So yeah, I think it makes sense to probably power through to the extent that we can. Obviously, there will be things that come up for individuals, and that's fine. So yeah, there's plenty to do, that's for sure. All right, back to you, Caroline.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is reminder of upcoming elections. So each year after we get a new board appointed, we have elections of officers for the positions of chairperson, vice chairperson, and secretary. We don't have a secretary right now, and it's time to do all the elections anyway, so I am going to put that on your agenda for the June meeting. I more just wanted to give you guys a heads up so you can think about how you want to do that, how it works. You can look at the rules of orders or procedure, but somebody would nominate someone for chair, there'd be a second, and then you'd vote, and the same thing for the position of vice chair and the position of secretary. So that's just an FYI. Just to make it easier, I'll keep moving on, and then you can ask me questions at the end. Project Review Board continues to be busy. They had 2 residential design review certificates issued this month. They reviewed a preliminary plan and had a public hearing for the Harris Secret Ridge subdivision on US Route 1, which is 40 buildings, 80 units, they're duplex structures. LOB on Marietta Lane is going to be having a site modification to add a kind of reinforced grass area that they'll use for mixed use space. And then the board looked at a conceptual plan for a commercial project on US Route 1, which would have contractor suites in it. The only thing I had also for you guys tonight, you had received an email, or some of you at least had received an email about a meeting tomorrow night regarding a group that's going to be looking at implementation from the downtown Freeport vision. I know Sam, as chair, was invited to represent the board. We've had a lot of interest in this. There's a lot of people in Freeport that are really excited. We have made the decision that we are going to switch the meeting over to Zoom. I think if there's a couple board members that want to come and share their thoughts, I think tomorrow we'll look at the projects, we'll identify, things that might be on the vision plan implementation table and that you guys might already have on your radar for the coming year or in the works. And then you'll get some information to bring back to your boards and committees. Nobody there would be making a decision as a board and committee member, but I think, to be fair, we don't want, some boards and committees to have a full board there and then some to have one. So I think if there's someone other than Sam that wants to go and join in that discussion, I think we could do that. It would be good to know who from the board thinks that they would have an interest. I'll turn it back over to you guys to get questions or feedback on those last 2 items.
Yeah, so I don't have any questions. Does anybody have any questions on number 4, the upcoming elections?
No.
No.
Those are.
Looks like Mitch.
Yeah, I see Mitch's hand. Before we bounce over there, sorry, we're just Mitch. I know you just came in. We're trying to limit the switching back and forth between the room and Zoom for technical reasons. So we're not trying to ignore you. I just want to take care of the room first, and then we'll bounce over to you. Anyone else interested in joining the Freeport Vision Working Group? Other than I've offered to do it as the chair.
What time
But-
is it?
I think, tomorrow I believe is 6 o'clock. There will be lots of meetings on this. I think they're planning for roughly a monthly meeting schedule, at least initially. But, so I suppose that time is maybe subject to change, but my guess is it'll stay 6 if I had to guess. All right, so Anna is potentially interested, and then,
I'd like to pop into some of them.
yep.
It's all right.
Yep. Yeah, and they're all public meetings, so that anybody's welcome to watch. I think Caroline's concern is just avoiding having.
They're gonna be Zoom, or can we come here?
Tomorrow will be Zoom. That was switched. I guess there's several members of the working group who are close contacts or
Yeah.
with the recent spike. But yeah, in general, I think the goal is to have them be in person, but not able to make that happen this month. Mitch, I see a hand. You're all set, Mitch. Uh-oh. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I think you basically answered my question. I just wanted to be. I think you basically answered my question. I just wanted to be involved. I can't go tomorrow, but I did want to. And you said some people can't come. I don't think you don't want to be overloaded, but I did want to be involved if I could. Just not tomorrow, later time. So that's fine.
Looks like Caroline has a hand
Did
up.
I lose you now? No, I don't hear anything. Now you're back.
Can we go to Caroline, Adam?
Go ahead, Caroline.
Sorry, I'm not used to being on this side and raising my hand. I don't want to just jump in. Yeah, just to clarify, we were setting it up to have 1 or 2 to avoid quorums of a board there, but I am going to go ahead and advertise on the web that it's possible that there could be multiple representatives from a boarding committee there. So if, Andy's free tomorrow and he shows up on Zoom, it's not going to be a problem. I think Sam's summary was good. The intention was to meet in Zoom tomorrow, but we have quite a few people for various reasons, including close contacts that can't be there. So instead of bumping the meeting out, the switch was to go to Zoom, but I'll make sure to let the board know when those meetings are coming up, and hopefully there'll be an in-person option or a hybrid option going forward.
Okay, item number 2 is approval of minutes from the April 6th, 2022 Planning Board meeting. This may have set a record for the length of the minutes, 17 pages, I believe. Quite good minutes. I wanted to give a special shout out to Robert's quote on the end, some paragraph, page 16, where it says that he recognizes that he's out over his skis. Basically, he's not an expert. I think that encapsulates maybe 4 or 5 of those pages for all of us. So, do I hear a motion to approve, or does anybody have any comments?
Approved, we authorized the minutes of the last meeting.
A motion and a second? Someone? All right, all in favor, and Rosemary was not there, so all in favor. So we have 4 in favor. Excellent, so that's item number 2. I do believe we have an oh yeah, sorry, Mitch, also I saw that hand go up. Oh, does that mean we have to do a roll call? Do you know the answer to that?
Wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, if we do a roll call. Okay, because,
Easy for Sharon.
yeah.
I'm saying yes.
Yeah, okay, so, all right, so we're gonna go back to that vote. We already have a motion and a second. Anna,
Aye.
Andy,
Yes.
Wayne, Mitch,
Is that yeah. Is that
Excellent. There we go.
yes? I mean, yes.
That was
yes.
an aye from Mitch, and I also vote yes. Okay, so we have 5. Sorry about that. Getting used to the hybrid. I think we have an unapproved set of minutes. Yes. And do we have a quorum here? So Mitch was not here. Mitch was not on the board at that point. I think it was the 4 of us would make a quorum unless Anna is not here.
I can't remember if I was there or not.
Caroline.
I need to pause you. Thank you. That would need to be on the agenda for you guys to take action on it. We'll put that on the next agenda for you guys to review and approve. But for the record, I'm sorry, I forgot we don't have Sharon here tonight because it's just a workshop. Sam, I know the vote was 5 A's. Can you tell me who moved and seconded the motion on the minutes that were printed on the agenda?
I moved, Andrew moved.
It was Anna, I believe.
And Anna. Yep. Andrew moved. Anna seconded.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we'll get that December 1st meeting at a later date.
Because Anna was there. I have the.
Okay. Wow.
Okay.
Rosemary's
Thank you.
on top of it. All right. Item number 3, presentation by the esteemed Adam Bliss, town engineer, regarding stormwater permitting for Freeport. We are lucky enough to have Adam here in person, juggling various duties tonight. So I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, Chair. Caroline, could you put your hand down, unless you have something to say? While I get set up, Caroline, do you need co-host privileges later on in the evening? Give a thumbs up or down. Don't know. Okay.
Both.
Here we go. Good evening, Planning Board and audience. My name is Adam Bliss. I am your town engineer. And tonight is a brief introduction to stormwater regulations. I've been asked to keep this brief and allow extra time for questions and comments. So I've prepared 7 slides that cover or that review the regulations at the federal, state, and local levels. Slide 1 begins with terms and acronyms, and then we'll cover the federal, state, and local regulations. And then we'll transition to a sort of a subset of state and local, actually federal and state, which is the MS4 permit. And think of MS4 as a municipal stormwater discharge permit. Then we'll transition to comparison of local regulations with our neighbors in the greater Portland area, the Maine DEP. And then we'll conclude with some discussion. So real briefly, some terms and acronyms that you may have heard and will hear tonight. I don't intend for us to remember all of these, but just make you generally aware. Oftentimes we hear best management practice, or BMP. That's a broad term. One of my college professors prefers the term stormwater control measure, which I tend to like, SCM. That could be a bioretention pond, a rain garden, something like that. We also have erosion and sediment control BMPs. Those are your sediment berms, your silt fences, and things like that. We also have non-structural BMPs, which are vegetative. So BMP is really the important acronym to remember. Maybe you've heard of Chapter 500. Chapter 500 is a Maine DEP regulated stormwater management law, and we'll get into where that applies. The Clean Water Act. Then we have low impact development. We won't get into that tonight, but in several months' time, into next year, we'll have to visit that at the planning board level. Municipal capacity relates to Chapter 500 stormwater law. And what that does is it allows me to review and authorize Chapter 500 stormwater permits on behalf of the state. So what that does is it lessens the permitting and approval time of developers coming in. By statute, DEP can take 90 to 180 days to review and approve. plus an additional 1,400 to accept it as complete. The town, on behalf of the DEP, can do that in a lot less time. I mentioned MS4. It's kind of a tongue-full. Instead of trying to remember municipal separate storm sewer system, separate being the operative word, just think municipal stormwater discharge permit. Permit by rule also relates to the DEP. That's really the lowest threshold for state permitting. TMDL we'll briefly touch upon, and urbanized area and urban impaired streams both relate back to MS4. So at the federal level, we have the Clean Water Act, which was 1970s federal legislation during the Nixon era, and our own Senator Edmund Muskie was very instrumental in getting that act passed. What it does is it establishes a basic structure for regulating pollutants from stormwater runoff into waters of the United States. Those waters are wetlands, streams, rivers, lakes, and the ocean. It also, that legislation also creates quality standards for discharge of stormwater. Within the Clean Water Act, we have, as it relates to Freeport, we have the MS4 permit, and regulated municipalities must have a permit from the DEP and we must meet certain requirements that minimize stormwater pollution. The US EPA, as we are likely know, regulates air, water, and soil. They publish the stormwater rules, and they delegate administration of those rules to most states' DEP agencies. And then really a subset of this is the MS4. Again, EPA creates the rules, they delegate administration of that municipal stormwater discharge permit to Maine DEP. At the state level, we have various thresholds when a permit is needed. I don't want to go into the weeds on this, but at the lowest level, we have a permit by rule, which really means when a project comes in and it disturbs or proposes more than 1 acre of developed area and less than an acre of new impervious area, they need to submit a good housekeeping plan, a pollution prevention plan, and an erosion and sediment control plan. Many of our projects fall under that category. Then there's Chapter 500, that middle tier between permit by rule and site location of development. We can break that down into subdivision projects and your standard site projects. For site projects, if more than 1 acre and less than 3 acres of impervious area are proposed, they need a Chapter 500 stormwater permit. A little subset of that is if a project is located within an urban impaired stream watershed, which we'll touch upon in a little bit, when the 20,000 square feet of impervious area is exceeded, they need a Chapter 500 permit. And then there's the subdivision part of it, less than or equal to 14 lots of residential or less than or equal to 5 commercial subdivision lots require a Chapter 500 stormwater management permit. And again, Freeport has what is called municipal capacity to review and approve those permits on behalf of the DEP. The very top tier is the site location of development. And those permits are comprehensive. They address groundwater, light, noise, stormwater, and about 20 different sections that have to be addressed. We don't see a lot of these. And when we do, DEP handles the permitting. And then there's the MS4, which we'll get to in a couple slides. So at the local level, we have in the zoning ordinance, section 529, and within the subdivision ordinance, we have article 11.16. And in very basic terms, there are 4 criteria. 1, use the natural features of the site. In other words, use and implement bioretention, vegetative measures to break up those large tracts of impervious area. Number 2 is quantity, and really that's the rate of runoff from stormwater. Post-development rate has to be less than the pre-development rate. And oftentimes detention systems are used to slow down that water so it meets that number 2 standard. Stormwater quality is the treatment of water through some sort of filter system that removes potential pollutants that stormwater contacts with runoff, or that contacts with parking lots. Those pollutants can be thermal, they can be chloride, they can be erosion, they can be heavy metals, brake dust, oils, grease, antifreeze. Our current standard is that an applicant is required to retain the first half inch of runoff from a storm event and hold that back for 24 hours. We'll get into the details on that in just a little bit. And then number 4, when applicable, project must comply with DEP standards when they exceed those thresholds I talked about earlier. The Ms4 permit, it's a big deal, okay? It's a permit that we have to apply to the Maine DEP for, and we receive authorization to discharge stormwater from our storm drain system into waters of the state. It's a big deal. We've been regulated under this permit since 2003, and the next permit is planned to be issued July 1st, 2022. We'll get into some important changes coming up in a couple months. That area is not the entire town, but it's the urbanized area, which is delineated by the U.S. Census Bureau every 10 years, okay? And generally, that area, as of right now, runs north to south from just beyond, Route 1, just north of the village, all the way down to the Cousins River, and including parts of South Freeport. All of that area either drains through Frost Goalie Brook, Concord Goalie Brook, Merrill Brook, Mill Stream, Harrisseeket River, and obviously Casco Bay. Within that permit, there are 6 minimum control measures, but within those measures, there are dozens of items that have to be reported on by the town. Either Public Works or myself have to make sure they get done so that we stay in compliance with that permit. The consequences of non-compliance are fines, bad press, the proverbial doghouse, if you will. And we have passed every audit and every annual report with, knock on wood, flying colors. And we want to keep it that way. So there are 30 communities within the state that are regulated under that permit. Think Orono and Old Town, Bangor, Brewer, Lewiston, Auburn, Greater Portland, and the Kittery area. Interestingly, not Augusta. Some of those municipalities have urban impaired streams. Freeport has 2. Some have 0. Some of our neighbors have 0. Some of them have more than 2. We have 2. And that creates an additional set of standards that we must meet. We have 2, Concord Goalie Brook and Frost Goalie Brook, and those are impaired because of high development associated with impervious parking lots and buildings, bacteria, and chloride from road de-icing, okay? We'll get into that a little bit more. Important changes coming up with the new permit include a low-impact development ordinance that will be coming before this planning board next year, and I think into 2024. A lot of the work will be done by our partners at Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District. So we'll come to the planning board, myself, and maybe one of our partners, and with all the homework done. And we'll discuss at the granular level if you want, or at the high level. But, and low-impact development is a strategy to create, or is a strategy to develop sites that mimic the way the land used to be. So instead of large tracts of impervious area and parking lots, we break them up with vegetative kind of strips and bioretention ponds and rain gardens. We're intercepting runoff and getting it to we want it to infiltrate into the ground rather than just rocket off the pavement into a catch basin and then down the storm drain system into our precious water resources.
Is there no difference between discharge into saltwater versus freshwater?
That's a good question. When it's chloride related, if it discharges into the ocean, it's immaterial. But when that discharges into Concord Goalie Brook, Frost Goalie Brook, that's a big deal because the aquatic organisms and the fish that eat those healthy organisms can't survive in a high salinity environment. So it kills the food that the fish eat on, okay? And then two other changes are construction runoff control. This is really cleanup. What construction runoff control has to do with is the DEP doesn't have the staff to conduct the Chapter 500 stormwater construction inspections. So they're pushing those inspections down onto the municipalities. We already do these inspections, but we'll want to take a careful look at our ordinance language to make sure who has the authority, generally the CEO, and who does the inspections. Generally me, the town engineer, or maybe a public works department staff person. And then outfall monitoring is a very important change that actually requires the town to go out to all 106 pipe outfalls and do analytical monitoring. We need to test for all kinds of things, and it's going to be expensive. Not crazy expensive, but it's a lot of work. And again, we're committed to maintaining compliance with this permit and getting a passing grade, and that won't change. The next slide is a comparison of local stormwater regulations. And I've broken the table out in, I hope, a somewhat digestible manner. The middle two columns address quality. Okay, the left middle column identifies the area of a proposed development that needs to be treated. The right middle column is what size storm do we want to ask a developer to treat. Okay, so the IA and the DA refer to impervious area and developed area. At the DEP level, at the very bottom, they require, through Chapter 500 and site location of development, 95% of a project's impervious area and 80% of the developed area, basically the grassed area, must be treated for stormwater. And of those areas, 1 inch of the impervious and 4/10 of an inch of the developed have to be treated. So we go from area to volume based on a design rainstorm. Yarmouth, our neighbor to the south, they say, we like DEP standards, we're going to reference Maine DEP. Saco and Scarborough are very similar, but their rainstorms are 1/2 inch for impervious area and 2/10 of an inch for developed areas. Enter Freeport. It's kind of vague and open to interpretation. And this is an action item that I recommend we address. No particular urgency, but as downtown continues to development continues to happen, particularly downtown, we should have a clear standard. and I'll touch upon how to approach that in just a second. Our standard is 1/2 inch of rain must be detained for 24 hours. Okay? How big of an area? The entire site? No, that's not practicable. The new area, all developed area, going back through the history of time, we need to figure that out. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can borrow from our neighbors to come up with something that makes sense. This is the last slide, and at the top are some discussion items. And I intentionally put triple bottom line right up top to get our brains kind of wrapped around how to approach creating clear and specific stormwater regulations that take care of the planet, take care of the people, and take care of the environment. Economic development. So the 3 Ps, people, planet, and profit. And the intersection of those 3 circles can be thought of as a sustainable approach, okay? It creates balance amongst those 3 perspectives. It doesn't kill a project, if you will. It addresses the social, it addresses the social and the environmental concerns. Something that we should talk about either tonight or later on is the redevelopment standard. As you know, the downtown is heavily developed in terms of impervious area, but our ordinance doesn't say when a new project comes along how much of that existing development needs to be treated that is currently untreated and goes into Frost Gully Brook and Concord Gully Brook. Okay? What I do not recommend is we adopt a grandfathered status or standard, meaning if a site was developed pre-pick a year, you don't have to treat that area. I don't recommend that approach because the town is ultimately on the hook for mitigating to the tune of several $1 million the impacts to Frost Gully Brook and Concord Gully Brook. I intentionally didn't add pictures of what's going on in those 2 brooks. I'm certainly happy to provide that in a follow-up, and certainly happy to do a site walk with you. It's kind of alarming. I'm not discouraged. So again, redevelopment standard. I have MS4 and TMDL as a discussion item. I don't know if we're really going to have time to talk about that tonight. But TMDL, I will, in about 30 seconds, say it's a standard that the EPA sets, that it's actually a target goal for 2 things relative to Freeport. One is the amount of impervious area within a watershed, and the concentration of bacteria within our 2 urban impaired stream watersheds. We have to meet those target goals, and to delist, we would have to be well below that TMDL target. So in the case of impervious area, if a target is 8% of a watershed, no more than 8% can be impervious, but we're at 20%. We can't just remove 12% of the parking lots and replace it with green space. You wouldn't have any parking, you wouldn't have any patrons, it just doesn't work. So we have to get creative with low impact development and using natural bioretention measures to mimic development before the site, or the pre-development of the site. The last item is, under discussion, is what I label as the 90th percentile storm. Earlier you saw 1 inch, you saw 1/2 inch. Those are largely borrowed from either other municipalities or from other from the EPA. The 90th percentile storm is a statistical approach, okay? And it makes sense. So if we took every rainstorm that fell in a given year over a long expanse of time, and we grouped them in order, we find that 90% of the storms that fall are 1.2 inches or less, okay? That's a manageable amount of stormwater to capture. That isn't burdensome on economic development. It addresses the environmental and through green infrastructure rather than detention ponds and parking lots. It makes a more pleasing site to actually want to be in. And then, so next steps, which would be future meetings, I think we should, based on your guidance tonight, I'd like to come back with some recommendations, and no urgency, but we'll want to start tackling the low-impact development ordinance, either late this year, maybe early 2023. Timing, I think, is critical because of the comprehensive plan. I don't want to interfere with that process. And then some cleanup work with the construction runoff control. So I turn it over to the board. If you have any questions or comments, or would actually just like to move on to the next item. No hard feelings, one way or the other.
Well, yeah, definitely open it up to a quick discussion here. I mean, my initial thoughts are, a lot of this I would defer to people who know more, this is speaking for myself, than I do about this kind of thing. I like Yarmouth's approach of referring to the main DEP for their standards. That way, as if and when things change, we're referencing a live document. We don't have to go back and go through the process of updating our standards to reflect current best practices. So I like that approach. I think it makes good sense on a couple levels. I know there's other things that also would it's not that simple. Obviously, there's other considerations to think about here. But yeah.
Well, that makes total sense to me, so my question is, what would be the downside of doing that?
I don't see a downside. It's very clear. It's well-known amongst consultants and developers. Really, all we really have to do is define what percentage, 95, 90, something like that, of impervious area, and address the redevelopment standard. Okay, what happens when there's an existing, just say there's a parking lot down here behind us that has a housing project come along, okay? And there are a couple of examples where the entire site is paved.
Can't make it worse, but how much better do you need to make it, I guess is the question. Is that the...
Yeah, that's true. And DEP has a redevelopment standard, and they make you go through a calculation that compares the use intensity as it is today and the use intensity after the proposed project. And the challenge with that is, if a housing project were to be proposed on an existing parking lot, you're essentially going from a high intense use to a lower intense use. So there's still some standards that have to be met, but I'm not convinced it goes far enough. And just so you know my position, I support economic development. I do not want regulations, stormwater regulations, to thwart economic development. I think it's important to the community, revitalization of the downtown, to really to, anyway, I'll leave it at that.
It's not in our interest to incur millions of dollars of cleanup
Right.
and mitigation fees either. So I think that's the other side of that coin, right?
Yeah.
Is-
Correct.
Yeah. So,
I think it'd be interesting if we could see an example, if maybe Adam could lay out an example how a developer is affected by the rules and what he has to jump through, and then what the town's responsibility is, so we could, make some comparison here on, what these rules mean to us as a town and what these rules mean to the developer. Because we have to hit some middle ground that works for everybody. Like Adam said, we don't want to discourage, but just to pick DEPs out of the air, I don't know what that means for me. I mean, we're accepting DEP, but how does DEP affect, why have these towns picked different ones besides DEP, and why have they just gone along? So I guess a little more in-depth explanation would be helpful for me. If it is for anybody else or not, I don't know.
No, I think that's a great point. It seems like,
Because when the project review board or the planning board goes into the comprehensive plan and we set new design guidelines for the downtown or something, we really say, okay, what happens? Can this parking lot be redeveloped effectively? And if we're gonna get a developer to come in and actually do these kind of things,
right.
you know.
And like Adam said, we don't want stormwater to be the holdup.
No, well, we want stormwater to work.
Yeah.
And we want to find ways to make it work for in Freeport, because we have to do something.
So that's very helpful. Here's a very simple example from a financial standpoint. Suppose a $10 million housing project comes in. That's a pretty real number if it's multi-unit housing in the downtown. And suppose the stormwater cost for that project were $100,000. You're talking 1% of the project, okay? From my standpoint, that doesn't appear to me to be an economic development problem.
Is that what you see as a real number?
Yeah, that's a very real number.
Okay.
Of course, it's site-specific.
Of course.
Yeah. But,
So they plug in 1 or 2% for those kind of things?
generally, yeah. The challenge, though, is those 1s or 2% when they become 1,000,
Oh, I understand.
through engineering or through whatever, that hurts, or inflation, that's when things get tight.
Has stormwater management technology been upgraded much in the last few years? I remember I complained for years, I lived down on Route 1, and all we had was these retention ponds that were 6 or 8 feet deep, and I always thought there was new technology that was ground level, under parking lots or something like this that filtered it, because they just seem so ugly to everything's got a pond, a pit out back.
That's a great question, and yes, they have. I'd say the Chesapeake Bay area, specifically Maryland, North Carolina too, in Philadelphia, they are what I consider the leaders of bringing forth newer technology. The interesting thing is it's not new. It's natural through bioretention systems, dry, shallow, planted areas that intercept runoff, infiltrates it into the ground. It's green, much more pleasing to be near than a blacktop parking lot and a detention pond. Caroline has a question about.
Mitch's hand is up, so we turn it over to, oh boy. I know Mitch's hand has been up for a while. Can we go to Mitch first?
Yeah. Can I speak? Can I speak? Does it work now? You tell me. How's it now? Can you hear me?
If you can see us, can he?
I can see you. I can hear you. But you can't hear me. I'm unmuted. I'm unmuted.
Go ahead, Mitch.
Now you can hear me? Yes? No?
Can you mute it for a second? Mitch, the problem is that
that's a
we
yes, and I
can't
can't
talk
hear you.
after we give you the floor for a second because it creates
I
feedback.
gotcha.
So when we ask you to speak, we have to just then step back. Otherwise, we get into this endless cycle of technological and real life feedback, so to speak. So go ahead.
I totally get it. I totally get it, and thank you. And I don't have that much to add. I first wanted to echo what Andy was saying, which is that it'd be important for us to learn as we are. I think everybody's going to agree on what we have to do here, and it is that triple look. And the tricky part is going to be on the redevelopment. And it would be super helpful if we could learn what the difference, say if you take a parking lot and you want to develop it, what would 90% look like and what would 95% look like, and what would be the relative costs of that, just so that we understand what we're talking about. I think that would be important education before we make any decision. And then the question I wanted to ask involved, you mentioned taking us on a tour of Frost Gully or Concord Brook, and the two affected ones. And I wondered if just in a sentence or two, you could tell us what we would see. And then I had one side question to that, which is downtown does not drain into either of those. Is that correct? And I'm done.
It's a great time to do it. You'll want some boots and maybe some long pants and tall socks for certain critters. We'd probably keep it simple, go right over to Leon Gorman Park, walk through the trail system, and make a little diversion along one of the gullies and streams there, and you'll see some serious erosion. And so to answer your other question, the downtown does drain into Concord Gully Brook. It actually goes, a lot of it drains through underneath the train platform through two culverts. And it goes into a stream that flows underneath West Street. And then that goes out to Porter's Landing. That's a very simple look at how the water flows. Frost Gully Brook takes basically from Bow Street over to just past maybe the Harris Seacott, and then from, say, just beyond L.L. Bean campus down to Mast Landing. So the downtown drains predominantly through into Concord Gully Brook, a smaller portion into Frost Gully Brook. Caroline had a comment that I think is important. I don't know the details yet, but if she says if the low impact development ordinance is a standalone document, then it wouldn't go in front of the planning board. So I don't, back in 2009, a post-construction stormwater management ordinance was adopted. That was a standalone ordinance, so similar concept. It's its own ordinance. It's not embedded within zoning or subdivision. So I guess I stand corrected. It probably wouldn't come before this board.
Wayne?
So there was a brief mention about costs that could potentially be incurred by the town. Wouldn't the developer of a new project generally be the one paying for prevention of stormwater exacerbation?
The developer would be responsible for meeting the standards as it relates to their site. We don't have any other mechanisms that would put that financial responsibility onto a developer. We don't have a stormwater utility fee. That's something I don't think anybody has any appetite for. There aren't that many communities in Maine that have one. So I'll leave it at that.
So if they're meeting their standards in their new development, by what process is there cost that will flow through to the town?
The best example I can give is the Concord Goalie Brook TIF. In 2020, the town entered into a tax increment financing agreement with LL Bean that creates a funding mechanism to repair the Concord Goalie Brook watershed. So they're investing a lot of money into their corporate campus. That added value creates additional tax revenue. A portion of that tax revenue goes into I call it a bucket, a TIF bucket. And of that bucket, there is a list of eligible projects that money can be used for. Stormwater is one of them. Downtown revitalization is another. There's a pretty lengthy legal document that resulted from that TIF agreement. So.
So you're saying, excuse me, so you're saying those buckets of funds may not address the stormwater problem sufficiently, and so that it'll be left to the town to cover that?
The town will have some responsibility, probably the majority, the far majority.
And that could include mitigation for the urban impaired streams. Is that part of the potential liability for the town?
Yeah, it's repairing the severe erosion within the streams. It's addressing bacteria. It's addressing an impervious area, things like that.
So in your view, there's no reasonable ordinance that, going forward, there would be some kind of requirement that new development cover these costs?
Nothing comes to mind, particularly in light of, economic development and the downtown revitalization.
Well, we can't really hold a new developer to past
Exactly.
sins, let's call them, that happened in Freeport. I mean, we can only help them find a way to clean up what they're doing. I remember years ago, they had a lot of bacteria counts off the parking lot runoff studies. Must've been back in the 90s maybe, or the early 2000s. And they were studying what was running in down behind Beans, and well, basically it was parking lot, a lot of it was parking lot runoff, I think, from,
Yeah, I could say just
we called it the puppy urine study, but
anecdotally, I mean, so Frost Gully Brook runs right behind my house, and
Yeah.
I figured this out an embarrassingly long time after we moved in, maybe 6 months. And initially, I was really excited that we had this brook running. It's a pretty steep bank, but it was awesome. And then, maybe the second or third time I went down there, I realized that actually the water is not something you want to let your kids splash in, or it's full of bacteria, and yeah. So I think, yeah, it's close to home for me. I'd love to see this stuff.
have we used it? Have we used any of the TIF money to start on that project down the mitigation of the stream?
Good question. First, Sam, the health of the stream has improved, but there's still a long way to go, particularly in Concord Goalie Brook. Frost Gully Brook's biggest problem is erosion, and from erosion is phosphorus. When soil gets disturbed, a lot of phosphorus within that soil gets into the water, and then that flows to the bay, and that creates an algae problem. Not necessarily an algae problem for Freeport today, but many other locations. Andy, to address your question, not yet. That bucket will accrue money over time. It's going to take 30 years to fully, accumulate a full bucket. I suspect projects will come along so that, we'll never truly have a full bucket, but
Do we have enough in there that we have a targeted project for that can be funded?
Not yet. It's the graph is not linear, meaning it's not like, this amount of money consistently every year. And actually, it's a curve, right?
As that project gets done, we get more money?
Correct. We have to wait for their project to get done and that added tax,
Value that gets
Added-
captured.
yeah. But the money, that added value gets put into the bucket a little bit early on, and then it increases at a greater rate later on. So it takes time to accumulate enough money to put in an impactful project.
So do you think as we develop, say somebody comes in and wants to redevelop a parking lot, it seems like we could improve our brook by then having a new development come in, and we just don't have parking lot runoff, then the new developer will then mitigate, will be, in a way, he'll have to comply and mitigate to straighten out the situation, at least on his spot.
Yeah.
So these things should improve with redevelopment in a way. Sounds funny, but it's, he can do green technology and
Correct.
maybe a green roof or something.
Correct from the standpoint of if you have a parking lot that has zero treatment right now,
Yeah.
and everything runs off into the brook, and we have many, properties that do that, and then you capture that stormwater and maybe put it into an underground tank with an open bottom that has a sand filter below it, that's excellent. That's an excellent method. It's underground, it infiltrates. That soil-water contact time removes a lot of pollutants, and then it slowly gets into the brook.
Clean.
Rather than rocketing off the pavement and creating an erosion problem.
And taking bad stuff with it off the pavement.
Correct.
So I'd like to move this discussion along. I think we have marching orders here for you, Adam, if that, does that seem reasonable to kind of put together a little package for the board of, real world scenarios and costs, and how? Yeah.
And I also heard, look at other municipalities and maybe figure out how they arrived at their treatment storms, half inch, 1 inch, what have you.
Yes, right, and how that, those different scenarios might impact future potential developers.
Just one last question. When do these problems become DEP responsibility versus municipal responsibility?
Versus our responsibility? They are 100% our responsibility.
So what does the DEP do with pollution going into streams? They're not responsible at all?
We are responsible.
Okay.
And
So they're an oversight, basically. They set the rules and then they tell us when to enforce them.
And please don't take this as alarmist, but as reality, particularly as environmental concerns become more heightened. If we don't take care of our water and our stormwater, we won't be the first to be picked on, but I can guarantee you a neighbor within the greater Portland area will get sued. And if we do a bad job, we will be in a lawsuit. And we won't have a stormwater permit to discharge water from our storm system. So we want to stay compliant. We want to get an A+ on the report card. We want to create some clear standards that address those 3 Ps I talked about. And fix what the damage, to the degree that we can, that's been done.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add, I know Mitch had asked a question about, what we might see on a site walk. I don't remember when, but a couple of years ago, I think, Adam, you said probably the easiest way to visualize or to see what we're talking about here is to go down to, is it West Street, where Concord Gully Brook flows under West Street, and if you're standing and looking at south, looking away with your back to the fire department, you look on the left side, and there's kind of, there's a little wetland, and then you look on the right side, and it's like totally washed out, and that's where the spot at which all the town the runoff from downtown enters the brook, and it's totally different one side of the road to the other, and that is sort of the problem in a nutshell.
It scoured it right out.
Yeah, exactly. Is that accurate, Adam?
Very accurate. And I apologize, I didn't have my mic on during that last kind of comment period. Very accurate, Sam. It's been improved because I got a grant from the DEP to put in an arch culvert.
That was a really fun construction project to watch.
You saw it?
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, super cool.
Because before, all that water from the village used to be put through a straw, if you will, which created a fire hose and blew out the stream. Now, it's an arch that is sized for the original stream width plus some more. And it's got some structure in there to take care of the erosion problem. More work to be done, but that was a $300,000 project, and I was able to get, I don't know, more than a couple $100,000 in grants for that one. That's probably the single most important project identified in the Concord Goalie Brook Watershed Management Plan. And it just so happened that these two grants aligned, and I was on it, and we checked that box. So,
Thank you.
Great. And I saw, Mitch, I did happen to notice over there, your hand was up. I see it's back down again, but okay, you're good. All right. Great. Moving on to agenda item number 4, continued discussion of the possible uses of cannabis manufacturing and processing and cannabis cultivation. Caroline, do you mind giving us a brief overview, kind of refreshing our memory on where we stand on this one?
Okay, I think we're good. So I'm gonna go ahead and proceed. So at the last meeting, we had a presentation from the town attorney that was recorded. It was put on the town's website, even though it wasn't an official meeting, where you guys took action. It did happen to be on Zoom, and we were able to record it and put it on the website. So if you did miss it, although I included a printed copy of the presentation in the packet, it is on the town's website if you missed it in person and want to watch it, or if you just want to rewatch it. So Cecilia, I think, is going to be the municipal expert in cannabis by the end. So she's pulled together some information. We were hoping to bring you a little more information tonight, but due to some things going on in the office, we didn't accomplish everything we had hoped. So there's a couple things we have before you guys tonight for discussion. 2 things. One, we talked with the town attorney, or we learned from the town attorney at the last meeting that the standard buffer for cannabis, there's a requirement around certain uses. And so that was the uses of schools. There are some daycares, not all daycares, but the municipality can choose to further restrict it and require buffers around different uses. So that's one of the questions we have for the planning board. Cecilia made a map, which we'll show you and I can share on screen, as to where our public-private, I'll say primary schools are located. Daycare information is a little bit harder to get because if you look on the available information on the state's website, it's intertwined between in-home daycares, which the attorney said typically don't fall into the buffer unless we choose to put them in there, or daycare centers. But again, that is something we could regulate. Some municipalities choose to have a buffer around all daycares regardless of their size. The other thing Amy said is that although the standard buffer starts at around 1,000 square feet from the property, we could seek permission to go down to 500 feet if we want to be a little bit less restrictive. So I think we'll start by showing you that map. I'll put the map up and let you guys react. I'll try to minimize any back and forth. So we'll really try to focus on hearing from the board. After we look at the map, we can look at zoning districts in which we permit manufacturing and processing. So Adam, are you able to give me the ability to screen share the buffer map that was out in the room on the table tonight and given to the board before the meeting? And then the only other thing I want to note before we dive in is the director from the council was also on the table tonight, and in your packet, the director from the council was for the planning board to look at the land use regulations for cannabis manufacturing, processing, and cultivation. Again, we reviewed that at the last meeting. I'm just gonna see if I can share this with you.
Caroline, I can't make you co-host until Tom stops hosting.
That's okay. If
Actually-
whoever's hosting can just let me screen share, that's
Or
fine.
I stop co-hosting. Tom, why don't you stay as host? Caroline, you are now co-host. Can you screen share? Okay, I'm going to turn the mic over to you, but give it a second before you talk.
Okay, can the board members in the room see the screen with the map? Sorry, it's really small from my view here, but I know we're on a big TV in the room. Can you guys see the map okay? Thank you. Maybe I'll ask Cecilia to walk you through what the locations are, just to kind of orient the board with the buildings that you identified and put the 1,000-foot buffer around.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the red buildings represent, the red on the map represents where the school parcels are. And then you have that white and black buffer, and that's the 1,000-foot buffer around the schools. So, as Caroline said, the state has that 1,000-foot buffer, which we can request to lower it. However, we can also have a longer buffer, a more stringent requirement. So you can see, one thing that of all the areas, of all the zoning districts that allow manufacturing and processing, you can see from this map that, that village VC1, VC1, it kind of gets, most of it would be cut off by this with the school buffering. And also to note, as we are going to be looking for direction from the board in terms of, where and how we want these establishments is, you can also think about other types of sensitive uses. So, the state has that buffer, 1,000 foot that can be lowered from schools, but, a lot of other towns look at other things that they consider sensitive uses. For example, playgrounds, churches, other types of recreational facilities, libraries, and as Grady had mentioned at that workshop, residential could be another option. So, yeah, so I think me and Caroline are going to be looking for some feedback of the board in terms of, what do you think is appropriate, which districts you think, this type of cultivation and manufacturing use would be appropriate in. And yeah, so if you guys want to have a discussion, I'm ready to take notes and also answer questions if you have any.
Just before we deliberate, I just want to say we'll have the board deliberate and ask questions, and just so to avoid the technology issues, we'll try to lump questions at the end if that works. It sounds like it might be the most efficient procedure.
Sure.
So the board members in the room, I think if we have questions, we'll try to Cecilia and/or Caroline. And then Mitch, we will give you a couple chances to jump in as well, just to try to minimize the back and forth. So I think basically we have this map that shows the current districts which allow manufacturing and processing. I think the point here is to try to determine if we think that these areas are good areas to allow cultivation, and if so, what other restrictions might we want to add, if any, and then to think about the school buffering and any other sensitive areas that might want particular attention. So, thoughts?
I just have background question of how is it decided the zones that it would be permitted in, and is this the conditional use that's been drafted thus far, or?
I believe the table is for the current zones that allow manufacturing and processing, which is a current use that is allowed. Caroline, can you nod if I'm right about this? Okay, it looks like we need. Let me try to finish, and then Caroline can. Or actually, let's just let Caroline jump in because she's going to do a better job than I do.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I wanted you guys to rewind. I think there's two discussions. I think we want to start with the easy discussion. The easy discussion is looking at that map. We know that there's 6 or so schools that are shown with 1,000-foot buffers. Are there other uses such as all daycares, or Cecilia said we can consider things like churches or playgrounds? Are there other uses that the board would consider sensitive that they don't feel like it's appropriate to have manufacturing and processing and cultivation of cannabis products nearby? I think the starting point was we thought, if you tell us what you feel like we need to buffer or protect from being around those uses, we'll map those out, see how they look, see how they overlap, and that is going to weigh in immediately. Like as Cecilia pointed out, when you look at that map, you can kind of see it really eliminates most of the VC1 because of the buffer. So what other, if any, uses does the board feel should be buffered? And do you feel like 1,000-foot buffer is appropriate, or do you want to reduce that? Do you want to consider standards that would only require these uses to be 500 feet away from the schools? So if you guys want to address that now, then we can put up the maps for manufacturing and kind of continue to the discussion on that next.
Yeah, Wayne.
So I have a pretty basic question. Have we identified the harms that leave the premises and cultivation and manufacturing facilities that will affect schools, neighborhoods, churches, or anything else? What is the harm that we're trying to address here?
Piggyback on that question.
Cecilia, am I correct that you have a potential response to that? You can shake your head or nod. To me, it looked like you had an answer there. Sorry to put you on the spot. Or Caroline. No.
Sorry, we're having a really hard time hearing you guys. Do you guys want to get all your questions and then we could run through them maybe? And if you guys could just speak louder.
Okay, yeah, so we'll put a pin in that one. I see why it's important to ask it first, but let's keep it in the room here for a couple minutes.
I'm waiting for the answer to that
yeah.
for sure. My first thought is that I would say that daycares should probably be on this list too. I think home daycares are going to get tricky because just from a mom's perspective, they're like constantly changing and it might be hard to identify them. So I don't know if I'd go to home daycares yet, but I would certainly, if we're going to do schools, I would do a school setting of a daycare. And for me, like the thing that comes up first is like the smell, just like smelling. I know that the smell is very potent, but I'm curious to hear what other harmful, and not that that's harmful, but that's like not appropriate for children. And then I'd love to hear public feedback. I mean, like churches, that seems like a pretty sensitive topic too, of like people I would imagine might feel pretty strongly about that.
And many daycares are in churches.
Very true, yeah.
My question is, I know we have, I think, 2 operations in Freeport,
Right.
which are north of town. Are we trying to expand? We trying to make them, I know they're sort of grandfathered non-conforming, I think. I don't know if that's the proper term or not, or what this situation is legally. Are we trying to expand them into other areas of town, or are we trying to just make these 2 guys more legal? Because I know the state has given us finally a definition, right, that we can plug in. Am I correct?
The state has updated their standards, yes, so that we
And
can.
it is? It's manufacturing. Is that what they're
They've
calling it?
Yeah, is it manufacturing and processing
Yeah.
lumped into one?
See? So
Yeah,
that's why
and-
we're talking about these different zones.
Yeah, yep. And I think, for me, this was a few months ago now, we heard from didn't we have a couple members of the public come in interested in expanding, who didn't have current, I feel like there was one person,
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
who is interested in expanding existing, and either expanding an existing operation or moving an operation into town. So I think there is the possibility of expansion. I think, also just keeping in mind economic development in town and, identifying areas where this might be inappropriate use. I guess for me personally, I think these areas, I know we're getting a little away from the buffer discussion, but I think these areas are, generally good areas to see this sort of use. I do second sort of Anna's concern about the odor that presumably gets out of at least some of these manufacturing facilities, and trying to keep a buffer from schools. And I think my personal feeling would be to keep the 1,000-foot buffer, but not try to go after home daycare, identifying home daycares. I think there's a couple, Bean Sprouts comes to mind as a
Yeah.
daycare that's,
One down next to the hardware
Dovetail.
store too, just moved in
Yeah.
on Lower Route 1.
Yep.
Gosling.
Yeah, so I think there's a question then about if we keep the 1,000-foot buffer for all of these locations, we are gonna get, 1,000 feet's a pretty long way, and if you have, the school, I bet the school 1,000-foot buffer from the high school gets pretty darn close to the 1,000-foot buffer from Bean Sprouts, and so that would wipe
Yeah.
out, the whole area between here and, I don't know, the car wash, basically.
It'd be nice to see them all on the map, though, to see,
Yeah.
like, if we are totally wiping out areas or.
Do we think we need to expand out of the zones they are in now?
You mean MDA and MDB?
Yes. Is there a reason to expand there's 2 up there now. They seem to
Right.
work at that end of town. They found a home up there. Is there a need to expand down on the lower, because I live on Lower Route 1, but is there a need to expand to another zone right now?
Well, that's what I was wondering, like, why were these decided but not R1?
Manufacturing's
R2?
permitted there.
Yeah.
But it just hasn't been permitted R1 or R2 historically, just no one's wanted to do it there.
Yeah, I think there's, the rural, it's part of keeping the character of the rural areas is keeping, manufacturing and sort of more industrial uses out, concentrated in this Route 1 corridor primarily. I think the other area to me that might make sense is the industrial 2 area over by Bean, and potentially C4, although C4, never mind, probably not. C4 is where there's now a whole bunch of residential units right there,
Yeah.
so.
So if we are going, if we're going to make buffers and choose areas that are appropriate and not appropriate, I would like to see more specificity about the harm. So let's say if it is odor, it's a factual question. Do odors leave these premises or don't they? And to what extent and how far do they go? I mean, these are facts that I think we should know before we write regulations.
Yeah, I'm not sure who is that a Cecilia and Caroline, what's the word, task, I guess, for lack of a better word? Yeah, to go figure, I'm sure that some other municipalities maybe have tried to go after this information. Yeah, I see a couple hands, so let's turn over to Mitch first, and then Caroline.
Well, I'll just, I mean, the question that was asked about what's noxious is the key question. And it's hard to have this conversation without that. I'll just say I'm coming from the position that if manufacturing and processing is permitted in an area, this manufacturing and processing would also be permitted in that area. And without understanding, I don't even understand why anybody would even know what's being manufactured or processed, save a sign. Now, if there's a noxious odor, then that's very important and something that we would want to pay attention to. If not, then I would just default to, I'd like to know why it matters. For schools, for churches, for anybody.
Caroline, do you have something that you want to say? You can just shake your head if not.
Yeah, so I was going to try to answer some of your questions as best I took notes here. I think we need to think about what our community feels like the harms are. We had actually two confirmed growers that went in under old uses, old standards that were manufacturing and processing, and we had a third. I'm not going to guess how long they've been there, but two of them we had complaints about odor, but it was years ago. The state regulations, they didn't have the regulations back then, the same ones they do today. They regulate things such as lighting, security, odor. I think, we can go into the harms. I also think you'll have the ability to, put the land use standards. So we can do some outreach to other communities, see the pros and cons. I think we also need to understand how these businesses operate a little more. When I think of manufacturing and processing, we think of like places that either construct things or shipping facilities, and they are large traffic generators. They might have outdoor machinery, they might have outdoor equipment. And I know we do have a few current business owners on the call tonight, and they might be willing to shed some light on, what a manufacturing and processing operation, or what the ones we have today looks like. I hear your comments on daycares. Cecilia and I will get the additional information on daycare centers, and we can put that on a map for you. We'll get some additional information on the smell and what you can and can't regulate. I'm not sure what you think about churches. This was really just an initial discussion. We wanted to get some initial feedback so we could start putting some standards together for you guys to consider. Really, to get the conversation started is why we gave you what we did tonight. If you want, I can show you the map of manufacturing and processing. When people call me, they often say, I want to grow cannabis and you allow, or usually they want to sell cannabis in a resale storefront, which the council did not direct you to consider. But the next thing they ask is where we allow manufacturing and processing. So that just seems like a good place to maybe start the conversation. But if you want more details kind of on the business operations first and what our communities feel like the impacts or harms might be, and we're happy to gather that and come back to you with the map of the manufacturing and processing zones.
Great. I think, I guess sounds like we have some direction to get a little bit more data. I think another thing that is a possible, something that's come up before is whether we allow outdoor manufacturing in, some zones, but not others, and I think that, that could be a good way to, potentially limit the odor or those sorts of concerns in sensitive areas. So,
Can I ask Carolyn a question?
of course.
So Carolyn, I'm looking at the excerpt from the August 3rd, 2021 Town Council minutes that you included in the papers, in our papers. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me start again. I'm looking at the excerpt from the August 3rd, 2021 Town Council order that you included with our papers. And I noticed that it was a very close vote, that there were 4 yes and 3 no for giving the planning board this task. Could you tell me what the 3 out of 7 opposition was about?
I do not recall if they disclosed that when they took the final vote. I do know that, we can all observe that vote was close. So once the new council was elected, that was part of the reason that we had the annual workshop with them. We wanted to review our workload and make sure they still wanted us going forward with projects they had sent to us. Cecilia has gone through a lot of those minutes. Cecilia, do you remember the details on that 4-3 vote that Wayne was asking?
I don't remember the details on the votes of the council members, but in reading through the minutes a little bit, there were a lot of residents who had concerns and that opposed, the council moving this forward. So yeah, it's going to be something that, not everyone's going to be happy about it. So yeah. Another thing too is that we, it's to keep in mind that if you do go back and listen to that workshop again that Brady and Amy, the town attorney, gave. The town attorney, she did not recommend having caps. A lot of towns have caps on the total numbers. So if that's something that we want to take her advice and not consider, you might want to think of other ways if you think that is something that you want to control. And also the size of the facility too would be tied to whatever we as a town opt in. So there's like those 4 different tiers of different sized facilities. And I point out that with some uses, for instance, with the MDA and MDB, there are restrictions on the size of manufacturing facilities. And there's also some restrictions on other size of facilities, such as storage and warehouse facilities, and even the outdoor schools. It's something that the board can consider limits on the size of the facilities as well. And yeah, finally, to also keep in mind that the facility itself, oftentimes, it looks more, often these are indoor growing sites and we're processing. So there has to be that security on the outside, and that includes lighting the whole facility on the outside and also video surveillance. So you can think about the impacts to the neighbors of that, and we can discuss that more too as we gather more details. Oh, sorry. One last thing is for the odor control. It is a requirement to have, we can have a requirement for odor control, and often they put these filter systems to mitigate the odors. I don't know how, if there's ever times when the odor might go away, leak out a little bit. So it would be interesting to see if any other towns have experienced problems with that.
Sorry, I just need to clarify. We were not directed to get into the licensing or caps. So the planning board is strictly looking at the land use. If there's reasons that the land use standards you develop create restrictions, like you don't want them a certain distance apart, that's fine. But as far as licensing and any caps, that's going to be a decision for the council.
Yeah.
I was at the meeting when they voted 4-3.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure I talked to some of the three people there. They were pretty opposed to, first of all, retail and any expansion. I spoke against it because I think it's still a federally prohibited substance. That's my beef. One of them, if it's legal, it's legal. It's just, obviously the state has licensed it somehow, and there's 25 or 35 states that have legalized it in a lot of ways. I have nothing against medical marijuana. That's not my beef either. But I think the expansion of recreational, I have some issues with. Not tremendous, but I just, it's like anything else.
Yeah, there's no way around the fact that this will be controversial no matter how we
So,
do it.
so where I buy supplies sometimes in Biddeford is a warehouse complex. And the marijuana grow guy there has forced out almost everybody else in the warehouse complex. He's taken over a very large space because these guys have so much money, they have driven up the price of warehouse space everywhere. And my distributor that I buy stuff from every now and then, luckily, his landlord is going to build him another warehouse space because he can, in a different section of southern Maine, because he can rent this one here for so much money to the grow guy. I think Fastenal is still in there, but he'll probably leave at some point. And every now and then when I'm down there, you can smell it through the walls. Not every time, but every now and then. If he's, I don't know if it's harvest time or process time or what it is. I don't smell it outside, but you can smell it through the walls or around the, right around the door sometimes, but you never smell it in the area.
Yeah. So it sounds like there may be a concern about, like the presence of cultivators driving up costs for, warehouse space.
All the warehouse space in southern Maine has
Right.
driven the price up. So this guy who's got a small business is having a hard time finding a place to go.
Right. Freeport. There you go.
If there was warehouse space available in Freeport, he would
Right.
probably
Well,
come.
I think that's an interesting.
But this is what they're going into is these big
Yeah.
warehouse slots.
I've heard that anecdotally as well. I remember one of my favorite little shops got booted out of their place in Portland and had a heck of a time finding another place to go sell their cross-country skis. So,
Because the amount of money they generate is so large,
yeah,
Yeah.
they can afford to
Yep.
pay whatever it commands to own that space.
right.
And you can't blame the landlord.
Yeah, no, it's supply and demand. Econ 101. Okay, so I think we do have some direction for Caroline and Cecilia, things to look into here. I guess I'd like to move on unless anyone has further thoughts. Mitch, you give us a thumbs up maybe if you're good with moving on. Mitch might be frozen actually.
I think so.
He is. Sorry, Mitch. Yeah, I know. It is a very strange world. Mitch is just staring at us. Oh dear. We'll look for. I know Mitch did warn us ahead of time that he might have a little bit of spotty internet connection, so not totally surprising. Item number 5 is an initial discussion of possible amendments to Section 602 site plan review, the Freeport zoning ordinance. I think we'd be best served by turning over to Caroline for a moment on this one.
Okay. I think you can hear me, so I'm going to start in. So the council's been getting a lot of feedback about the development process in Freeport from all aspects, starting when people initially come in through when they receive their permits in the construction process. One of the comments is that it takes too long. We did some scenarios and presented to the council to show them, a couple examples of when people first approach us when they're going to open a business, when we might meet with them, how long it takes them to get an application, and then what board they need to go through. And so the directive of the council was, I think it was eye-opening to see that not all the delays are at the municipal level. For example, people often come in and then they don't close on the property till after they get approvals, so they delay or they wait for appeal periods. Like there's other factors, but there are some things I think we could look at as a community if we want to change the process or make some things faster. For those of you that have been on the board for a while, I think you'll agree that Freeport's been pretty cautious. They've been wanting to, in the past, have a lot of stuff go through the board and not delegate a lot of authority to staff. A while back, I can't remember the exact year, maybe 2012, the planning board did put some considerable time into the site plan review section. We used to have an old format where we broke projects up by major and minor, and then they went to the project review board and some limited things were approved by the staff town planner as a staff approval. We switched over to this new format and got away from the major minor categories. Instead, we have 3 categories of projects. We have staff approval ability by the town planner. We have a staff review board, which is currently made up of Adam, myself, the code enforcement officer, the superintendent of public works, and the fire chief. And then, of course, bigger projects go before the project review board. So what we have before you tonight is a first stab. We need to circulate it more internally, but we wanted to get initial reaction from the board. I think it could be really good to have the project review board weigh in as well. Once we see what we're doing for numbers, we'll kind of do some more digging into applications to see really what of a difference it would make. Just to summarize, projects that go before the project review board, they have 3 primary functions: reviewing for design review certificates, reviewing for site plan review, and reviewing for subdivision. Site plan review is all we're talking about today. It's, in more recent times, a very small portion of what they're doing. Subdivision's regulated under state law and needs to go before the project review board the way we have it set up today. Design review, as we've talked about in the past, is probably going to be overhauled as a much bigger separate project. So we're strictly looking at site plan review. So we're hoping to make some changes to make the process easier, but we need to be realistic. It's going to make a small impact, but not a huge impact, because projects that trigger design review, even if they could be approved by staff, they can't be staff approved for design review, if that makes sense. So you all had copies of the language in your packet. I will kind of walk you through quickly and then kind of give you some examples of some of the thresholds we're talking about. So the first thing we did was kind of go through and try to clean up the language, and Cecilia did a lot of comparison with our neighbors to see what thresholds are our neighbors using. It's interesting, with the population differences and the commercial differences, some towns are doing a lot more at their staff approval or staff review boards, but we'll get to that. So the first section, applicability, we had some standards and exceptions under site plan review that really seemed like they would be more appropriate under the town planner function, or they were just in the wrong place. So it looks like we're striking a lot under number 1, but it's really just moving stuff around so the ordinance reads better and makes more sense to people reading it. And that is on page 1 of your handout. I think what you're looking at might have the old pages, page 238. Under town planner review, currently the town planner can review up to 500 square feet of impervious surface modifications or building modifications. It doesn't say increase or decrease in building modifications. It just says modification. The town planner can approve some changes to signs, but has no approval ability for new signs. So for example, Doughton's Construction came in and built a new building. They didn't have their sign design, which a lot of people don't during construction. So they had to make application to go to the project review board just for a ground sign. So it did add time and money to their process. What we have before you today is kind of some rewording from the beginning, which I noted, and then some cleanup. So the town planner could still approve minimal lighting, landscaping, recalculation of parking requirements, a reduction or reconfiguration of parking spaces serving a restaurant in VC1 where it's allowed. Changes to previously approved ground and building mounted signs. This would be adding in the ability of the town planner to approve ground signs if they meet the sign ordinance. I think the biggest change here would be modifications, including expansions of buildings and impervious surfaces up to 1,000 square feet. A suggestion's put in that be within a 5-year period. I'm a little concerned that could be hard to track, but the reason we have it in there is because we don't want someone to avoid the process by making small incremental changes repetitively. That's not the intent. And then after talking with Adam, and he can weigh in on this, we were concerned about just having one staff person sign off on that amount of square footage for a project that was located in the urban impaired watershed. It seems like it warranted more review, including possibly review by the staff review board, which would include the town engineer, which seemed more appropriate. Clarification that in the Village Commercial 1, now it says you can do a change of use from retail to restaurant or vice versa. We want to expand that so it doesn't only say restaurant, but also includes restaurant carryout. You know, we've seen a lot more smaller shops going in with COVID. People are getting rid of their seats. People are wanting to grab and go or eat outside. And then we are also suggesting, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of is a change of use from retail to office. We've had, a handful of people that have come in to do the change. They're not making any physical changes on the face of the earth. They've been smaller spaces, maybe 1,200 square feet or a little smaller, but they come to the board, and as we go through the standards, it's a lot of not applicable, not applicable, not applicable. So that was something staff is recommending we could put in here. And then again, previously approved, just kind of cleaning up our order and making it a little more user-friendly, is the existing provision for seasonal accessory outdoor seating. Sam, I can't see any of you, but do you want me to keep going, or you want to pause and ask questions or share thoughts? If you want me to keep going, you can give a thumbs up, or if you want to ask questions, that's fine. Keep going? Okay. All right, so down to the staff review board, Cecilia and I talked internally. One of the things I've wondered is why we don't have the police chief. I think it's good to have that person's perspective, and also with the variety of businesses we're seeing, it's good for them to know what's going where, and they also might shed some light on traffic issues or lighting issues, things that we might not think of. So that would be a suggestion that we would make. Under staff review board, one of the things that we would put in here would be site plan renewals, in which case the project still meets the local standards. So for example, with COVID, we've had people that have come in, gotten approvals, and haven't started within 2 years. So they've had to go back to the project review board when no standards have changed, wait their 21 days, make their full submission, just to have the board say, okay, and renew it. So we thought that might be something that could be appropriate for the staff level. The staff review board has a shorter notification period. They still notify abutters, but they're smaller, more simple projects. So there's a quicker turnaround, and we kind of schedule as needed. There are daytime meetings. And then we are adding some provisions for changing a use when building modifications. We used to allow it if there was a building modification between 500 and 1,500, the proposal would go from 1,000 to 2,000, the same for parking lot modifications. And I pulled a couple examples of approximate square footages. I don't know if you remember the building on Route 1 South. That's where we've seen a lot of our, straight out site plans that we've had in the past few years. So for example, the building, I'm going to date myself, it used to be the Weather Vane shop. It was then it was a daycare, then it was Doobie's Music, and now there's a pest control company. That building's probably around 1,000 or 2,000 square feet. So They came in and actually got a change of use and had to go to the board. They didn't modify, but that's just to give you an idea of a building and how big it is. The new Doton's building where they have their office and car wash, those are each around, one's around 3,000, one's around 3,500, just to give you an idea of how big of a project we could be talking about. And then we get into project review where we really weren't looking to make much change here. We were rather looking to see if there's some stuff we can get done more simply at the project review or through staff approval. We have some additional fairly minor cleanup as we go through. It's almost 8 o'clock, so I won't go into that in detail unless you guys have questions, but would really like some feedback on the thresholds, what you feel could be appropriate for the different review levels, and if you want to get some input from the project review board. So I'll turn it back over to the board.
Thank you, Caroline, and thanks to both of you for going through the not insignificant effort of updating all of this. I will say, speaking for me personally, I am A-okay with all of this. I think it's well within our excellent staff's abilities to make good decisions on this stuff, and I'm all for, lowering the barriers where, within reason, lowering barriers to allow people to move through the system more efficiently. And I don't think there's anything here that's, going to allow people to just sort of flaunt the rules. So, other thoughts?
I agree.
All looks reasonable to me.
I agree. Yep.
Great. That was easy.
This is where your
Is there
chips
specific stuff, Caroline and or Cecilia, that you guys want more detailed feedback on? I mean, I really, I did go through this. I was curious about why the police chief was included. I think it makes sense. The police chief is a very important person in town. But yeah, in general, I think it's all good stuff. Caroline, I see your hand up. I will turn my mic off.
Sorry, just one. Cecilia and I had a great debate about this. I'm pretty cautious, and I know this is a big change for Freeport because Freeport's been very protective of what goes to the board and the review thresholds. Cecilia was ready to go bigger, and you guys seem pretty open to the numbers before you. So do you feel those numbers are appropriate? Do you want to see more examples, or do you think bigger is appropriate? From this, before you answer, I will say most of the stuff we're seeing for site plans have been either Route 1 North or Route 1 South. One concern I do have about upping the threshold too much is that both of those districts, although they're not in design review, they do have a series of buffer requirements, visual appearance requirements for the building. There's a lot of things that the board isn't interpreting in regards to how the building looks from the road. Now, if we improve our standards and make them more clear, that will help in the problem. But today, there's a lot of discussion about things like overhead doors or the plantings and how they soften the building. And so if we take that away from a board of 7, that does change that dynamic. So just, I guess, consider that when you answer the question as, are the square footages big enough, or should we look at putting even more down to staff approval or staff review board level?
Thoughts on that?
I followed one project down my neighborhood where the Casco Bay Motors put their new truck garage in, and it just seemed to drag on and on and on and on, and I don't know if it was just the standards. I think maybe just, even if the standards were, I don't know if it's more open, or it just seems like there's a lot of discretion. So when the developer goes in, it's really not clear what he's got to do to follow. I remember him going down there and say, how many garage doors? Can you put up a balloon? How tall is it going to be? And it just went on month after month after month. And I understand the concern, but it's permitted use, and with certain reviews, I think you ought to be able to get through and get his permit. And, there's got to be a happy medium there somewhere. I think we've gone a little too restrictive on certain things. I'd love to have it be an open field, but I couldn't afford to buy it, so, but, I think he lost a tenant because it just went on too long.
Yeah.
He had a health care place lined up there, and I think he lost it because I remember coming to the board and trying to support him, and it was a good-looking building. I was like, could you put a dormer? We don't want the cars facing the street, but that's the back of the building now. Can you make the back of the building look better? And it just got very
Right.
confusing in a
Right.
way.
Right. The back and forth is hard.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You
And
you
every
can
time he
only
comes
modify
back
it.
every month, it's,
Yeah.
he's a month behind, he's 2 months behind,
Right. Yep.
so.
So are you, I mean, do you think that, even a building or a modification of greater than 2,000 square feet would be reasonable? I mean, that building, the Casco Bay Ford building's got to be
I don't know.
5,000
Yeah, I would assume.
square feet probably of floor area, I would think.
I don't know.
You can't really get a good view of it from the road, so I have no idea.
Yeah, I just remember walking back there when they were putting the stakes in the ground and doing a site walk, and, I mean, it's way back there,
Yeah.
And then there's the issue of can the doors face the street, and how many doors can face the street, and
Yeah,
there's some challenges with it. I mean, with all the zoning, of course.
I guess my tendency here would be to say that I think this is a pretty good starting point, and I think we might be well served to hear from the community on this before we tweak it. I think there's a good chance that there is some room to go up with the requirements and that's a bad way to say that. Lower the requirements by raising the limits on square footage of impacted space, if that makes sense. So go bigger, as you said, Caroline, to take Cecilia's instinct to go bigger on these and put more potential projects under staff review. So does that seem reasonable to everybody to hear from the public on this before we? Mitch, you can nod. Great, not frozen that time. Awesome. All right. Caroline has a hand up. Great.
Andy, I looked that up quickly. It looks like Casco Bay Ford is probably about 7,000 square feet. McGuire Construction, I would say, is somewhere probably around that between 6 and 8. But Sam, I think you said leave it as is, get feedback, and then we can see if we can go bigger. Is that correct?
Yes, that was my suggestion, is to turn it over to the members of the public and other stakeholders. All right. So before we open this next agenda item, which is agenda item number 6, I am going to recuse myself from this item. As I was reading through the meeting materials, I realized that it actually basically describes me. I was one of the residential projects that Caroline mentioned at the top of the meeting that got a design review permit at the PRB meeting last month. And then as I was going through this, I realized that actually the entire side of my house is over the setback. And so I would need to go to the Board of Appeals if I want to expand the floor area of the house. I didn't even know that I was in this group that we're discussing. But anyway, there it is. So I'm going to become a member of the public.
You can give us your feedback.
And yes, and I will give you my feedback, and there will be no surprises where I stand on this.
So I don't have your rules of order here.
Because our Vice President Robert is not here, so we don't
Caroline
have a
has
secretary
her-
right now.
Caroline has.
Caroline has her hand out. I'm gonna let her deal with it. Go away.
Could you, the microphone? No.
His is off.
It's off, yeah.
Caroline, you can go. Just give me 1 second delay, okay?
Sure, are we good? So our chairperson just stepped down. Our chairperson is not here, and we don't have a secretary. can the board agree on who, or you can motion or just pick somebody that will just preside over this section of the discussion? Okay, I'm taking that hand as Andy is going to be overseeing the board in this section of the discussion. It's not a public hearing, so hopefully it won't be too much pressure, Andy. So I will say that this was something brought forward by staff. It has been flagged quite a while by our code officer. He came to Freeport and he was like, wow, you guys don't have a provision that allows somebody that has a house that doesn't meet a setback to expand without going to the Board of Appeals, unless you live in the Shoreline Zone, in which case it's okay and we'll let you expand without going to the Board of Appeals. As you know, we recently overhauled the Shoreline Zoning section, and as we were going through that, this really stood out as something that warranted more review. In my opinion, it was something that needed discussion. I think there's pros and cons and some different ways to handle it. And then we do have a resident in the room tonight who at the same time was looking forward to expanding her house and discovered that she would have to go to the Board of Appeals for 4 inches because of something that was issued in the past. So what you really have here would be the request is, does the board want to consider in situations where someone like Sam, who has a house that, you know, the setback could be 10 feet, and let's say they're 8. Should they be able to add on a second level or add on a dormer or extend straight back if they don't go any closer to the property line? That's what we're really talking about here. When I looked around to other communities, there are a few different ways you could look at it. You could look at it for all uses, or a lot of communities will just look at it for single family residential uses. I think some of the pros are it will help people to add on to their house. You know, it's the cost of living everywhere is really high right now, even the cost of construction. But if it allows people in some of our smaller homes to expand and age in place or keep their families in place, I think that's always a good thing. You know, on the flip side, if your neighbor is only 5 feet from the property line and they have a single story, do you want them going up 1 or 2 stories if they're that close to the property line? So that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. Again, if you live in the Shoreline Zone, you can already do it. So we're really talking about the potentially houses or whatever uses the board feels are appropriate outside of the Shoreline Zone. And I'll turn it over to you guys for thoughts. And Andy's in charge, and you do have a member of the public. I don't know if you have anyone on Zoom, but I can see you still have someone in the audience if you want to take public comment tonight.
So I assume we're discussing the discussion language for discussion. So I didn't get a chance to go over this with Carolyn. But I guess the idea is to see if we can get this out of the Board of Appeals.
Yeah, it would still require review of at least the code enforcement officer.
Of course.
So I would have no problem with this change.
I hear from the public, but if we're already allowing it in the Shoreline Zone, then I don't see how we can not allow it in other areas.
I know we ran into this years ago with some people in another section of town. I was on the comprehensive plan years ago, and we made a adjustment on how it was a similar situation. Person wanted to expand the house very close to property lines, and we just sort of redrew the zone a little bit so it accommodated them. They were able to, instead of building a new house, to add on to their old house and be happy in their old neighborhood. I think it's a good idea. I know the state's coming through with the new zoning to be able to do accessory dwellings, and I don't know how that's going to fit into this, but I think it's all good. We've got a couple people here from the public. Maybe we should get some input.
I was just going to ask, can we take input from the public without having noticed a public hearing for this item?
I don't see why not. They're here.
It's like an informal one, I think,
Okay.
but you can,
And
yeah.
then that should be our next step, I would
Yeah.
propose.
Anybody want to? So step up to the podium, please.
Sam Capala. I'm now a member of the public. So thanks for taking my comment. Yeah, so I live in the V1 district. This side, it's also the design review district, where the design overlay district reduces my side setback to 10 feet. My house is at a little bit of an angle so to the property line, but I think depending on where you measure and which bump out you're counting, the house is 5 to 8 feet from the property line. The design permit or design certificate that I got and will now need to go get a building permit to actually build shows an addition off the back, a shed and a deck that would be closer to that would be within that 10-foot setback as drawn. So I would then need to go to the Board of Appeals, or I'd actually need to increase the setback and then go to the Board of Appeals to get permission to build this, because part of my house is legally non-conforming. So actually I can't do anything to my house without going to the Board of Appeals, as I understand it, which seems like a pretty high bar to just try to, add on to the house. So, and then also like you guys know, in the shoreline zone, it's already possible. So it feels like not what's non-linear application here where some folks are benefiting. So very much appreciate the board taking action on this.
So explain, you have a two-step process ahead of you, as the rules state now?
Correct, yeah, so now I would need to go, so I've already gone to the project review board for a design review certificate, which is because I'm in the design overlay district, so not everybody would necessarily need to do that. But now, before I can get a building permit approved, I would need to go to the Board of Appeals to go through that process to sort of sign off on the fact that my building is legally non-conforming. I think I'm understanding that process correctly. This is actually, I'm sort of figuring this out now as I was going through the meeting materials, because I actually had no idea that I would need to go to the Board of Appeals. So maybe Caroline would have a little bit of light to shed on that, but I think I have it right.
Maybe we can pull up Carolyn, because she's got a hand up.
I do have one, actually, before Caroline, I do have one quick question, additional question. So I've wondered for a while whether increasing the nonconformity, how that's defined. So for argument's sake, if my house is 8 feet from the setback, am I allowed to build an addition that is also 8 feet from the setback? Or do I have to have my addition go back to the 10-foot setback? Because I could see the language working either way. I am, in some sense, I'm not increasing the nonconformity if I'm still only 8 feet away from the property line. But now that I have more of the building that is only 8 feet, that could be seen as increasing the nonconformity. So that's not if that question makes sense. Okay.
Well, I would suggest that we discuss this either tonight or next time and decide which way we would want that to be interpreted, and then write it to be clear about which way that would be interpreted.
All right, I'm going to step away and let anyone else who wishes to speak.
Thank you for your time. My name is Louisa Picard. I live at 43 Bow Street. And I tried to do this process in early 2000 and was told that I needed a 5-foot variance, which I went and got and received. But I'm now getting to the project. And when I went in to see if I had everything I needed to get the project done, I was then told that I'm shy 4.5 inches. So if this goes through, then I won't have to come and speak again, and that would be really nice. All I'm trying to do is take the same footprint I currently have and just go up. I've offered to buy the property off of my neighbor. She's not selling 4.5 inches, so this is where I am.
So you're not trying to increase your footprint at all, you're just trying
No.
to increase your square footage inside your walls
Yeah,
by going
I'm
up?
currently 1 story, I'd like to go up. 1,
Great.
maybe 2, don't know yet.
Yep. So you're in favor?
Very much. And I'm in
Thank you.
favor of deciding this evening.
don't think we can do that, but
Well, just so you know.
thank you.
Thank you.
Carolyn still got her hand up?
You want to turn it over to her?
Sure.
Okay, mic's off.
So my hand was raised because we couldn't hear what Anna said. I don't think her mic was on, but I'll answer some of your questions. So currently, Sam, from what you were saying, yes, if your house is 8 feet from the property line and the setback today is 10 feet, you would have to meet that 10-foot setback. The nonconformity is existing, but if you add on, you have to meet the setback, otherwise go to the Board of Appeals. To go to the Board of Appeals, the language was just updated and your only option is to get one of the variance options. And some of the variance options are hard to meet because you have to prove you have hardship and no other use of the property. So it's time consuming and it's not something that's just easily granted. There's a public input process. As far as what we were talking about for nonconformity, in this case, I think what we have before you would be the nonconformity for the building setbacks. They would still need to meet the other standards, such as lot coverage, impervious area, land per dwelling unit, if that was a requirement. We're really talking about setbacks in this case. And again, I think one of the things we want input from the board on is, should this apply to all types of uses, or do you want to limit it just to 1 and 2 family dwellings? Like, should it go to a multifamily or should it go to a commercial? Should they be allowed to do the same thing, be able to add straight back? In the case of Louisa, who just spoke, and she's not the only one, we have other people in this situation, people that want to put a dormer. Louisa would have to have a weird addition and not really what she wants because of the few inches. I'll turn it back to you guys for additional comments, in particular if you have thoughts on the use.
Does anybody have any input on limiting use or?
Sorry that my mic was off. I think what I was saying was that I wanted to hear from the public, but I wasn't, if we're already doing it in Shoreline Zone, I didn't see how we could prohibit it and doing it in other zones. I think the question about residential and commercial and multi-use is a good one. And I'm trying to look to see what's currently allowed in the Shoreline Zone. Is it for residential buildings only?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
So Carolyn,
Can you hear
Anna
me?
asked a question. I have an additional question. If
Okay.
we do want to move ahead with this as soon as possible, we do have to notice a public hearing to make this change, correct?
Yes, you want me to go ahead? Can you hear me and everyone other than Cecilia? Okay, thank you, Adam. Yes, you would have to schedule a public hearing, would have to post public notice before you could take action on it. Geez, Anna, I forgot. I was just going to respond to what you had said to me. Oh yeah, you asked about the shoreline zone. Most of our shoreline zone happens to be in residential areas unless it's like marine waterfront or some other, like outdoor recreation school. Most of it is in the rural zone. So I think it's allowed in the shoreline zone, but there's more limited commercial or multifamily in those areas. I think, if you'd allowed it in town, out of the shoreline, you could pick up the commercial districts, you could pick up all the other portions of the residential districts. It's really just what the board is comfortable with and what they think is a good practice for Freeport. I think Andy also made a good point, which we're going to talk a little bit about the next meeting, but the state did just change the rules and the municipality is going to have to look and see if we need to change our language, which could potentially lead to additional dwelling units or additions for additional dwelling units. So if we saw an increase in building, this could be a benefit for people. We could see more people adding on if they wanted to add units and their setbacks were the limiting factor. So I think, it was a good connection that Andy made, and just, keep that in your mind as you deliberate.
I mean, I think we're still on, I think we all agree that some things, at the very least, residential needs to change in other zones, but we're still at step one and hearing from the public to determine the scope of that change.
Yeah, I think maybe we should, if we do go to commercial, maybe a size limit on commercial.
Yeah.
So some of the older existing buildings that are commercial, if they, can expand a little bit and they've got a problem, they can, benefit from that. But some big retail space, maybe not so much, so we can, instead of tearing down an old building, we can save an older building or change the use somewhat. But I think we really need to look at, most of our problems, I think, are residential, and they've been around for a while. So, and I think, I think we should move to doing something, move forward. Compare this to the new state law that's come through. The governor just signed the other night. So that'll be in effect, I think, in probably 90 days. I don't think it's an emergency action, so I think it'll be 90 days. And see how we can blend these two and make it work for people in Freeport.
Yeah, I don't think the new state law addresses this kind of non-conforming use, but if we're going to put something out for a public hearing, I would suggest that it apply to all structures, and let the public, tell us if there's a problem with that.
I'm happy with that.
Yep.
Mitch has a hand.
Maybe we should pull Mitch up.
Yeah, I guess I'm up now. You can hear me now. But yeah, I guess my concern, and we need to have a public hearing on this, because there are definitely two sides to the problem. And expanding a building that's non-conforming with its non-conformity does exacerbate the non-conformity. So what I wondered about, my question, Carolyn, was you mentioned that the appeals board has very circumscribed way, they need some reason to grant that variance. And I wonder if that's the place to, it seems to me, if somebody wants to expand a non-conformity, that should get an extra level of review. And so, but I think what you said is, and the extra level of review could only be approved in the case of some, somebody's got to have some hardship or some jump through particular hoops. And to me, the hoops you'd want to jump through is no neighborhood complaint. So, that seems to be the issue. Anyway, I think we're going to have hearings on it, and we'll hear both sides. But I think it's important to hear both sides, because you can make a problem worse. And I certainly would think, especially in non-residential, I don't understand why there wouldn't be an extra review. And I don't know who's that extra review by. It could be by the project review board. But somehow, if we gave I understand the problem. I understand the 4.5 inches. I can't imagine why that project shouldn't go through, although I haven't seen it. And if it's 3 stories high and it's 4, the neighbor might not want it. So I wonder if there are other remedies besides blanket acceptance that you can do more of the same.
Does anybody else want to jump in on this?
Nope.
So we want to agree to set a public hearing.
Yes.
And Carolyn can work up some language along with what we've got here. So we can move that forward. Can I make a motion to instruct Carolyn to set a public hearing? Can Carolyn hear us?
Oh, second.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so Carolyn can hear us, so we've moved and seconded a motion to set a public hearing to discuss these amendments to proposed for non-conforming buildings and setbacks, space standards.
And specifically to allow it for all structures pending the public hearing?
Yep. Is that acceptable?
Because we're Zooming, some board members will have to do a roll call vote, just a reminder, Andy.
Yep, so we'll do a roll call vote.
Sorry, I'm not just a member of the public. I'm not sure you actually need to make much. Just to move it to the next step, because it's not.
Oh, Andy, I was just gonna say, where you guys are all in agreement, you can just boss me around and tell me what to do, and I'll just go ahead and set a public hearing. You don't need to take formal motion and a vote. We'll go ahead and revise the language, get it in public hearing format. I think we could probably, pending, we can have full staff back in the office soon. We will try to go ahead and get that scheduled for the next meeting. If for some reason we can't, I'll reach out to you about that.
We're all set. Mr. Chairman, please.
Very nicely done. Board, really fun for me. Proves you guys don't need me at all.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I think all that's left is anyone wishing to address the board on non-agenda items. I'm going to guess there's nobody.
I have one thing. It's small. I would really like in an upcoming meeting to get a little bit of a debrief, maybe from Freeport Community Services, about the large New Manor population that has been moving to Freeport recently. I don't know if you all are aware, but Casco Bay Motel and another motel are currently taking asylum-seeking families, as Portland shelters have been filling up, and so they're coming to a lot of the vacant hotels north of here. So right now there's about 50-some folks, 50-some folks and, 50-some families and over 80 individuals. And they're going to continue to move in for the next couple months until it gets to about 300 people. And the children are attending RSU 5 schools.
In Freeport.
In Freeport. And so, I think it would just be really interesting to hear a little bit about the new communities that are moving here and their needs. And I think us learning about it as soon as possible could only benefit, and how it's going to be changing our community and growing our community. And so that would be something really neat that we could add on to the agenda. I would really like it.
So I share I think the feeling, that it would be great to learn more about it. I do wonder about the applicability of the planning board to it, because I don't know if there's any sort of like land use implications. I wonder if it would be something better served for, I don't know, actually, the town, like the council?
I mean, I
Or-
thought about that too. I'm like, is it applicable to planning board? But I think it is, because it's the people of our community. Sorry, Andy, did you want to say something?
I had a land use issue, and because I walk up and down the road, and there's a couple of guys came out of the Casco Bay Inn down there, and I got chatting with one of the guys that lives there. Nice guy, stopped. He was walking up and down the road looking for a job, but with another guy, but my concern is, and I expressed this to Carolyn the other day, and I don't know if we have an issue, but my concern was these, when you look under hotel motel use, it's a transient use. And what's happened now is one entity, the city of Portland, has basically taken the whole unit. So they're no longer a transient use. They actually become a multifamily, I believe.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to have that discussion, and not that I'm for or against it, but are they putting more, they use the building more because they're not checking out at 1 and checking in at 5 or 6. And because we don't have an issue with the water usage, but we do have an issue with the sewer usage. Does when we change these from transient use to multifamily use, how does that change, how it impacts our sewer plant? And then the other issue I had was, which is a different issue, but My other concern was Freeport's a tourist town, and how many units are being taken offline at the beginning of a tourist season? And how do we accommodate, it's not the planning board's process, but I think it's part of that discussion. We try to invite people here for 3 days to revitalize our downtown, and then we don't have rooms for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the two issues I had.
I think they're all very valid concern, or I don't want to, concerns has that negative spin. I don't mean it in that sense, but you know what I mean. The valid points for consideration. I wonder if we would maybe give it to Caroline to ask. Caroline, you can shoot me down, but I'm wondering if the town attorney would need to weigh in on ways in which this could, if at all, come before the planning board. Because I don't, the planning board doesn't have an enforcement capacity. So I think if there is, if there is a potential land use conflict with the way these are being used, it's still not a planning board issue. Unless, and this is a possibility, is if we're looking at changing so that it does come into compliance. I mean, if there's if the town council directed us to do that, or if there were some sort of imperative from any of the, various valid points of origination for that kind of change, then I think then it could come before the planning board. I just wonder what the right venue is for learning more about this.
That's fair.
And maybe, Caroline, I don't want to your hand is up. Great, I can put you on the spot. Can we hear? Yes, thank you.
Adam, you're getting pretty good at this. I might hire you to run Zoom meetings. Yeah, I agree with you. I really don't feel like in its current stage it's a topic for the planning board. I think it is an important community discussion. I think if people are individually interested in what's going on and the different populations that are coming into Freeport, I know Freeport Community Services has been very involved in this. I think you could reach out to them. I think we're going to have some community on discussion. There seems to be a lot of interest, but I would see it at this point being more appropriate to have at the council level. I'm happy to talk to the town manager about it, and if he feels for some reason it is appropriate, but definitely if people are questioning use or have other questions surrounding it, I don't think this is really the right time or place right now.
I would also say that I think the information exchange at the top of the agenda would be a great, if people want to share information that they've gathered, I think that, that would be a great time to keep us all up to speed. Again, I feel like it's something that is very important to the community, or will become very important to the community. And yeah, something to be aware of and take into consideration. I just want to make sure we kind of keep it on in the right spots, and not get out too far, especially given how much other stuff we have going on.
Yeah, following up what Sam just said, I think maybe the debrief you would like, maybe we'd all like, would be, just easily done by inviting Freeport Community Services to come and do the information exchange at our next meeting, informally.
Yeah, I think, if we can have a, something quick as part of the information exchange, I'm open to that idea. Maybe Caroline has other thoughts on that, but I'm open to that. Yeah, I do see another hand up from Caroline, so I will shut my mic.
I was just going to say, let me do some follow up further with Peter and FCS and see if they're, just even out of, I think there's personal interest in what's going on in the community. So let me do some follow up and see if there's something that is felt like it would be appropriate that the planning board could talk about, even if it's just an update on what's going on in our community in an informal conversation. if something does come up at the council level, I'll definitely report back to you, just like I do on other council activities or project review board activities where I know it's of interest to the board.
We have Mitch too.
Yeah, Mitch, go ahead.
Yeah, just a really quick question. Is there, can we just clarify that this is an acceptable use of the property? That's all I want to make sure. In other words, can you take a hotel and turn it into permanent housing? Or is there any restriction in what defines a hotel? And I'm particularly sensitive on the school issue. I think that's the one that's why you wouldn't necessarily put 50, dwelling units in. I just wanted to make sure it's conforming. That seems to be the only interest of this board. And if it's non-conforming, I understand we're not the enforcement body, but then, what do you do when there's non-conforming uses?
Yeah, I think also for better or for worse, it's probably not the job of the planning board to determine whether or not the building is in conformity. I'm sure we may all have personal views on that one, but I think that's probably one for the lawyers to hash out. I'm sure there are probably views on either side of that. I'm sure, the folks that are making these arrangements feel that they are doing it legally, and there may be others who feel otherwise. But again, I think it's an interesting issue, and I think, but I think as it is today, it's not part of the planning board's purview. Any final thoughts? All right, final agenda item is number 8. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Yes.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, so we got Wayne made the motion, Rosemary made the second. We'll do a roll call. We'll go to Anna,
Yes.
Andrew, Rosemary,
Yes.
Wayne.
Yes.
I vote yes, and then we'll go to Mitch. Mitch votes yes by way of thumbs up.
Yes.
We all saw him do it. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, and thank you, Adam.
Good reminder of how much we rely on Caroline being here.
Caroline, do you need to say anything, or should we?
Nope. She's gone. See you later.